Imagine winning the richest athletic event ever staged on this planet. The crowd is erupting. The cameras are flashing. Your name is being announced to the entire world. And sitting in an account somewhere, waiting for you. $10 million. Now imagine watching that money sit there. Untouched, frozen, completely unreachable. Not for a week, not for a month, for over 4 years. That is not a hypothetical. That actually happened. February 2020, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The King Abdulaziz racetrack is packed. The air is charged with the kind of electricity that only arrives when history is about to be made. Because on this afternoon, the world is about to witness the inaugural running of the Saudi Cup, a race conceived from the very beginning as the most expensive in the history of civilization. $20 million in total prize money, $10 million reserved solely for the horse that crosses the wire first. When that horse crosses the wire, his name is Maximum Security. Powerful, relentless. A horse built like a freight train and trained to match. His connections erupt, trophies are raised, cameras capture everything. The sport's ultimate prize appears to be in hand. The $10 million never arrived. Not that day, not that year, not for 4.5 years. And by the time the money finally moved, the story behind it had swallowed a federal criminal investigation, an international prize freeze, a prison sentence, a lifetime ban, and a rewritten record book. This is that story. To understand how completely the collapse destroyed what had been built, you first have to understand the scale of the occasion. As Saudi Arabia had not tiptoed into international horse racing, they had arrived with a statement that shook the entire sport. The Saudi Cup purse wasn't merely the largest ever assembled, it was roughly double the previous record. The world's elite horses were transported across continents. Connections flew in from America, Europe, and Asia. Everyone understood what was at stake. This was not a regional showcase. This was a declaration that the center of the racing world had a new address. And on the track, Maximum Security made sure the declaration landed. In the final stretch, he found himself locked in a battle that fans would talk about for years. Midnight Bisou, one of the most decorated mares of her generation, a horse whose career had been defined by toughness and class, refused to let him go. The two animals ran as though the other didn't exist, both digging deeper than comfort allows, stride matching stride down the length of the stretch. When it finally ended, Maximum Security had the margin. Barely, but he had it. He had the trophy. He had the legacy. He appeared, in that moment, to have cemented his name among the greatest dirt horses the sport had ever produced. Standing behind him in the winner's enclosure was trainer Servis, a man whose own story seemed almost too good to be true. Servis had not started with elite stock and unlimited budgets. He had taken Maximum Security out of a low-level claiming race, the kind of environment where most serious operations never look, and built him into a global champion through what observers described as a rare combination of patience, intuition, and horsemanship. The racing world had largely accepted that narrative without question. 9 days later, the FBI offered a different one. On a Tuesday morning in late February 2020, federal agents moved in coordinated fashion. Servis was arrested. Indictments were unsealed in a sweeping takedown that named multiple trainers, veterinarians, and distributors across the sport. Investigators described a large-scale conspiracy to administer illegal performance-enhancing substances to racehorses across the country. The 9 days of celebration were over. The illusion, built over years, collapsed in a single morning. What elevated the case against Servis from serious to devastating was not simply the charges themselves. It was the breadth and quality of what investigators had gathered. The FBI had been listening for a long time. Wiretapped phone calls captured Servis allegedly discussing the use of prohibited substances with the kind of casual familiarity that suggested routine. Among those substances were SGF-1000, a peptide-based compound banned throughout sanctioned racing, and clenbuterol, a bronchodilator that, administered in doses beyond therapeutic range, can function as a meaningful performance enhancer. According to investigators, these were not accidents. They were not oversights. They were calculated decisions made in the pursuit of results. But among everything the government had assembled, One piece of evidence stood apart from the rest: an email. The billionaire owner of Maximum Security, a man who had invested at the highest level to put this horse on the world stage, had at some point raised direct questions about the training program. A Servis responded in writing. He assured the owner, explicitly and clearly, that Maximum Security had never been given anything prohibited, that the horse's achievements were clean. It was a lie. And investigators had it in his own words. For the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia, the indictment created a situation with no precedent in the history of the sport. The winner of their landmark race, the race they had built to announce a new chapter in global racing, was now at the center of a federal criminal conspiracy. Their response was immediate and equally without precedent. They froze the prize money. All $10 million of it, held in place, inaccessible to anyone, until the American justice system reached a resolution. What that decision meant in human terms is worth sitting with for a moment. The connections behind Midnight Bisou, the mare who had given everything she had in that Saudi stretch, who had finished a hard-fought second through no fault of her own, were now suspended in a kind of legal nowhere. They may have been the rightful winners of the richest race ever run. They had no way of knowing. No authority could tell them. And so they waited alongside everyone else. Months passed. A year. Then 2. Then 3. The federal case moved through the system with the methodical weight that serious prosecutions carry. Maximum Security continued to race under a deepening cloud. The $10 million sat frozen in a Saudi account, the most heavily guarded, uncollected prize in the history of sport. And the question that should have had an answer within minutes of the final stride, who won the Saudi Cup, remained officially unresolved. For over 4 years, the sport couldn't answer it. Then the waiting ended. Jason Servis entered a guilty plea to federal charges stemming from the doping conspiracy. The sentence handed down was 4 years in federal prison. For a man who had stood in winners' circles at the most prestigious venues in the world, who had been celebrated as a trainer of exceptional gifts, the ending was stark in a way that defied easy summary. But a plea and a sentence in an American courtroom could only resolve one dimension of what needed to be addressed. The Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia still held the prize, and they still had to decide what the race meant. In August of 2024, 4 years, 5 months, and roughly 2 weeks after Maximum Security crossed that wire in Riyadh, they issued their ruling. Maximum Security was officially disqualified from the 2020 Saudi Cup. Jason Servis was handed a lifetime ban from Saudi racing, and the result of the richest race in history was formally, permanently revised. Midnight Bisou was elevated to first place. The mare who had fought stride for stride in that Saudi stretch, who had waited in limbo for years while a legal process ran its course through a system on the other side of the world, was now the official winner. Her connections received the $10 million. The record books were changed. The trophy, at last, belonged to the right horse. The 2024 ruling did not simply correct a result. It erased millions of dollars from Maximum Security's official career earnings in a single administrative moment. A horse once discussed in the same breath as the all-time greats of his discipline now carries a disqualification at the pinnacle of his career, a mark that no retrospective appreciation of his raw ability can fully erase. But this story was never only about one horse. It was about what the Saudi Cup was supposed to represent and what it ultimately revealed. It was built to be the sport's defining moment, its grandest stage, its largest prize, its most powerful argument that horse racing belonged among the world's elite sporting spectacles. And in a narrow, technical sense, it succeeded. The race was spectacular. The horses were extraordinary. The setting was unlike anything the sport had staged before. Though what no one planned for was that the winning connections would spend the next 4 years answering questions from federal investigators instead of spending their prize money. The inaugural Saudi Cup announced a new era in horse racing. It just wasn't the era anyone intended. It announced that the sport's darkest practices could reach all the way to its brightest stage, that even the richest race on earth was not insulated from the corruption running underneath it. Midnight Bisou's connections received their $10 million. The record books reflect the truth. But the question that stays, the one that doesn't resolve cleanly with a ruling or a sentence, is how many other afternoons, at how many other tracks, ended the same way? How many results were written not by the horses, but by what happened before they ever reached the gate?